Modpo has come to Seattle, Washington, and I'm standing here in the back of the famous fish market in front of the Puget Sound. And that location's not really relevant to the video we're about to make with David Colon over back in our hotel. David Colon and I are going to be talking about Rosa Alcalá and a book that she wrote called Undocumentaries. I'm really excited about that. It's not really a Seattle-ish thing, but it's an opportunity to meet up with David, and I'm looking forward to it. You know, I shouldn't even have mentioned Seattle because Rosa Alcalá is Patterson, New Jersey based, or not based, anyway, it's Texas now. But, yeah. So we're really not talking about a Seattle, a Northwest sensibility. No. So there's a book called Undocumentaries, and I've known about it, but our correspondence has led me to it. And I really, really love it. And we're going to talk about, rather than trying to talk about the whole poem, we're going to talk about two pieces from it. Sure. And these are Land Art in the Silk City and a prose poem called Adventures in Food Processing, Job Number 2. Yeah. So I think maybe I'll ask you to read the first one, Land Art, sure, and then I'll read Adventures in Food Processing, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay. This poem's called Land Art in the Silk City. They filmed the paint factory from the second story of our house, all those cameras looking out from us. We were the evening news, long as buildings were ablaze, or how the boy up the street dabbled in mesmerism, staring at a telephone wire and calling a name, rubbing letter against letter until a spark took flight down the line. She picked up always to a swirling sound, and how no one knows what's brewing next door until one barrel after another shoots 50 feet into the air and stars the night. What becomes visible in calamity quickly burns to nothing. He thought it best to send away for another guide. What art would power him to turn the river back to silk and make the world watch it burn?
Adventures in Food Processing, Job Number 2. Secretary to the sanitary piping impresario, his rubber leg, my nude hose, selling butt weld fittings, feminine parts for the ubiquitous screw. Even then, the only lady in the room, and with the dirtiest joke, dangerously close to the electric heater. We could be dorm room lovers whispering of revolutions in vacuum-packed foods. I look out the window to where the woods meet the road and think not everyone knows how peas get in a can, that the world needs me to sort out their messes from their mayonnaise, the lamentable suckback of such ignorance. So let's talk about Land Art in Silk City. Those pronouns are all over the place. It's very disjunctive, right? We have a they, yeah, we have a we have a she, switches to a he. Is that important?
It is. I also think that the ambiguity or the slippages are important too. I mean, I think I've written elsewhere that it often feels, this book in particular, it often feels like the book is stone sober in its faithful representation of issues you can't quite put your finger on. Mm. In other words, so by that I mean that by signaling documentary and by signaling that sort of like reportage of everyday life, or kind of giving voice to, maybe the subaltern or the dispossessed. There's a very sober regard of those scenes, but there's a lot of fuzziness and a lack of clarity, and I do think that maybe a high reliance on pronouns that may be kind of indistinct is definitely a part of it. Another is double entendre. I mean, first of all, I mean, land art could be, has possibilities.
Tell me some of the possibilities.
We'll say it so the title is Land Art in the Silk City. We know, so Silk City is a nickname for Patterson because of the industries that it had, the work that it produced. But, land art, whether it's, if it's playing on the, a kind of something different from the reliance on the Passaic River for energy to produce this stuff. We're not talking about the water, we're talking about the land, but also, do we land, like land as in a landing, right?
Land art, yes. Okay, got it.
There's always something to be seen. I mean, even from the very beginning, they filmed. I mean, film has a kind of like double entendres. Is it a veneer? Is it slick, or is it filmed as in video? Right? They filmed.
Really don't know.
They filmed. So did they cover it with a surface, or did they videotape it? Right. They filmed the paint factory from the second story. Yes. Right. And isn't that what documentaries are? There's like there's the world of the surface, and then we're going to reveal something. Right. A second story. Right. They filmed the paint factory from the second story of our house. All those cameras looking out from us. But there are other ones, like evening news. Right. Is it the evening news that's because it's at 7 p.m.? Or is it evening because we're going to level the playing field, right? Or are we going to even things out, right? Yeah. The evening news, and then buildings, letter against letter, down the line, right? Or what's brewing next door, or to look for another guide, right? There's lots of, implications of how you can take these things and the suggestiveness, the kind of like the quantum aspect of like there being like possibilities that are layered on top of each other.
And then you can do the simple what happened here kind of reading, which is what I did at first. I had this sense that there's a family that lives in the factory neighborhood, and there was a fire, and the eyewitness news crew said we'd like to film from here, and therefore they were in this family was in the evening news. Yeah. That it's another murder fire kind of typical Patterson 11 o'clock show, right? You can read it that way.
Yeah.
Do you know Alcalā's work, so you probably have a sense of where, pardon the phrasing, where she is. What's the sensibility? What's the tone that she brings to this, either poem by poem or across the books? Where is she in this? What is there a point of view that we can say is authorial in here?
Well, I think that she's actually. I think in some ways, one way that I can read this is that she's grounding herself, not in the documentarian's perspective or in that identity, but in the subject's identity, because. If I'm going to take, we were the evening, they filmed the paint factory from the second story of our house. All those cameras looking out from us. Right. If I take that right away as being like these are residents in a tenement building.
That's right.
And usually the perspective of the news that we watch on TV is something authoritarian, it's institutional, it's something, broadcast to us. But this time. We're the eyes, and they're coming in like to inhabit us, not the other way around.
Subjects, finally.
Right. Yeah, and now we're.
Are you saying that might be the subject position of this work, of this book,
I think there's
this poet?
There's a plausible reading of that. That's what I think.
If you're saying that, I think you're great.
Thanks.
No, but I think that's that's so great.
I think that's part of it.
That's what these poems are trying to do.
I think so. I think it's more of a, I think that. One way of reading it, and reading in, under the kind of like direction of understanding it as, undocumentary, which I love, it's,
We should talk about that.
Yeah. Because
book
also.
It's called Undocumentaries.
Yes.
Which suggests a bunch of things. Let's rattle them off. One, what does it suggest?
Documentaries, undocumented.
Right, as in immigrants.
Right, as in, she is the daughter of immigrants.
Right.
And
is there a third?
And then also just the document of actually of writing something, of a text. Right. But these are texts and maybe non-texts.
Yeah. So let's go back over them. So one is the documentary, as in the film crew, or really these poems. This is Patterson today. This is my Patterson. Okay. Two, the question of immigrants and the so-called undocumented. Yeah. Which, when you read it literally, means, we don't write about you. History doesn't include you because you're not documented. It becomes kind of a pun.
Yeah. You don't have a speaking role.
You don't have a speaking role.
In whatever drama of public discourse.
And third is, the accumulation of materials that testify, documents. Okay. Great title for a book.
Absolutely.
And how you use the word documented, documentary, I don't think you said undocumented, in the context of this prose poem, which otherwise doesn't use that word. So now apply the title, please, the title of the book to this piece.
Well, I think that in applying the title to the poem, I think that there's one aspect of it which is the documentarian. I mean, she uses certain, some of the words actually, filmed and cameras looking out from us in the evening news. So she does have, there is a certain aspect of, of reporters who are covering.
There are
this.
actually reporters.
Yeah, they're
story.
actually there. It's interesting but the document aspect of it being, of a text, right? One thing that I really love about this poem and the other poem that you paired with it, they're both prose poems, which has a hyphen in it, or is a hybrid. Just by using the term prose poem, we don't have a neater term for that. We're saying it's a poem, but it doesn't look like one, right? So or at least it's syntactically
Are you
coherent.
saying that the very choice of that hybrid form is part of the undocumented spirit, or the spirit of reversing the undocumented?
I think it's kind of like being somewhere in between, like authority and dispossessed, or the one who's doing the talking and the one who's being talked about, right? That kind of interstitial relationship that I think that, in lots of subtle ways, I think that she buttresses that sort of idea aesthetically as well as in content.
Let's turn from the land art to this food processing. So, job number 2. One gets the sense that the speaker, the subject position who is producing this book, we can say Rosa, or we can just say the speaker, the subject, has had a bunch of jobs, and food processing is one of them. So, this is this poem that's very witty and smart, and almost smart alecky.
Yes.
Dangerously close to the electric heater. Okay, one imagines a kind of slapdash cold factory where they're just taking risks with the workers' lives, possibly producing a fire. Dangerously close to the electric heater, we could be dorm room lovers, whispering, we, I guess 2 workers, friends who were nearby, whispering of revolutions in vacuum-packed foods. Now, revolution is a double entendre because it's partly revolution as in political radicalism, but partly revolutions in the bullshit selling phrases of revolution in vacuum-packed foods, right? So
maybe even a third would be revolving, but revolution about. Yeah.
So, and then she looks out the window, which is a common thing that people do in this book, to where the woods meet the road, and think not everyone knows how peas get in a can. What is she contemplating? Looking out at some more natural scene beyond the factory, and wondering, I live in a world in which everybody knows how to get peas in a can, but not everybody does.
Yeah. Well, there are also, if, canned peas are ubiquitous, but, you ever thought about, how that happens? I think that gets back to the title of the whole book, of, again, of, the revealing things that people may not know about. That's also kind of couched in a desire to pursue some justice. Right. I mean, one thing that I love about this is that again, with double entendre, she's using certain terminology from pipe fitting and plumbing that defamiliarize out of the context, feel like they're like portmanteaus or, like butt weld fittings, right? What do butt weld fittings do? They either redirect or resize the path of what's flowing through a pipe. So it would be like an elbow joint, or it would be something that would turn, 3.5 inches into 2 inches. But that's what butt weld fittings are.
I didn't know that.
And likewise, feminine parts, screws have, a masculine and feminine, so do, So do electrical plugs. So she's bringing out some of these, this terminology, really mundane terminology that I think that any plumber or pipe fitter wouldn't strike them as like having a poetry to it, right? But she's taking them out of context and producing this kind of almost a gendered tension, a tension between a he and a she, right? Secretary to the sanitary piping impresario. Right away, she's being, as you said, smart alecky.
It's pretty funny.
It is pretty funny. I mean, it's irony and satire,
so is the word
throughout
adventures.
this. Yeah, exactly. Adventures in food processing, right? Yeah, like adventures in selling insurance or something.
Exactly.
It's not terribly adventurous, but his rubber leg, my nude hose, right? Legs are in pipe fitting, like a leg would be something that would be a sort of kind of a piece that would collect sediment or dripping so that it doesn't clog a pipe. And likewise, a nude hose would be something that is not coated with a second substance.
Yeah.
And and so she's taking these terms that a plumber or a pipe fitter would use all the time, but by, putting his rubber leg, my nude hose, selling butt weld fittings, already has like a kind of a sexual tension to it for someone who knows nothing about pipe fitting or these kinds of industrial, concerns. Feminine parts for the ubiquitous crew. Even then, the only lady in the room and with the dirtiest joke. So she's building that.
And presumably that is the secretary, the one woman in this very male situation, right?
Right. Because then, if it is his secretary, then also, of course, nude hose has a different meaning, pantyhose, that or sheer. So,
right.
And so there's a
and then there's the imagination that they are like dorm room lovers. So there's two of them, it seems, secretary and the guy, the man.
Right.
So there's a lot of tension. But where does this ignorance come from? In the middle of this possibly power disproportionate situation, maybe a situation of some duress, this person needs this job, and this is in the middle of this, that's when she looks out the window to the woods to see what might be beyond this life, and then thinks, oh, I live in a world in which everybody knows how to get peas in a can, but there is a world in which people don't know that. And it ends with the word ignorance. You wonder whether ignorance is a positive or negative valence there. Wouldn't it be great to be ignorant about how you process food?
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I flew out to Seattle, because I've read that the last thing you want to order on a plane is the coffee. I don't recall exactly why, but it's probably not like, the freshest or the healthiest for you. And, it's one of those things that better not ask, just, get a ginger ale instead.
That kind of ignorance.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But to me, again, I feel like, if we were to look at this as on the scale of what a sonnet does when there's a turn after an octet, right? And when we get to the point and around on that ratio, I look out the window to where the woods meet the road is really where that happens. Yeah. Where there's a sort of kind of bringing in the big question or,
It does that. And you're saying that makes me think of something bringing us to a slightly different topic, which is I think these prose poems strike me sometimes as little microfictions. Well, not little ones, microfictions. Yeah. They're all little. And if I were to, Xerox a few of these and stick them next to the most avant-garde of Lydia Davis's microfictions or others, someone could read them as short stories. Which really starts to sound like the documentation of the life. Yeah. The little stories of the people. Modernism begins with fictions like Winesburg, Ohio, of different voices of regular folks. Certainly this is what the broad-shouldered proletarians of Chicago were trying to do. And I think of the word guide. I mean, I misread it. I think your reading is best, but I misread it as in order to understand Patterson, you have to order the WPA guide, the famous guide. You know, like if you want to understand it, the workers of the 30s wrote it up. That was documentation, and it was the documentary impulse. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is, I'm going to throw it back to you. Could we read this book as a series of little stories, little splinters from lives, from worker lives?
I think so. Tiny little flash fictions. I think so. And I think what makes them work is, as you had mentioned before, about her reliance on lots of pronouns, sort of like not being, you know, real precise about who she's identifying, who's talking here. I think that it works in that way of you thinking about them as sort of like mini flash fictions, because of the how you know, imprecise and nondescript she is of who's the cast of this play. So I think that, and in some ways they may only really work as little flash fictions because of that, because people can project, you know, they can fill in those gaps. And what she's really putting in is just sort of like sort of suggestions of a drama or some sort of narrative. But it's really just like of the slightest bit of suggestion. It's very impressionistic. A little stroke makes a cape, you know, that sort of thing. She does that quite a bit.
The speaker of the second poem, Adventures in Food Processing Job Number 2, has a longing for a world in which some people don't know how to put peas in a can. In fact, they probably grow the peas, and there's no cans, you know?
But I do want to, before we end, make sure that we say, you know, I do think that, you know, Rosa's experience, you know, as she has these lists of job 1, job 2, job 3, and 4, here I do feel like there is a particular experience of her, an experience of having a job as a woman. You know, secretary to this, you know, the sanitary piping impresario, where she is the, you know, amanuensis or assistant, and he is the impresario, as in he's like a patron, like, you know, the de Medici of pipe fitting, you know. But, you know, there's that kind of like showing that kind of power dynamic, but then again the double entendre of butt weld, the double entendre of my nude hose, the kind of dangerously close to the electric heater. Is it dangerous because it's going to start a fire? Or is it dangerous because you're getting pushed into a corner? Right? You know, and to look out the window, and then also to look at the lamentable suckback of such ignorance. I mean, it's just so loaded with suggestion. Meaning, I don't know if it's loaded with meaning. I think it's loaded with suggestion of pathways of that you can read.
If the little metapoetic moment or the recognition that this is an art form and an art work in the first one, Land Art in the Silk City, is what art would power him, the art it will require to take the Passaic and imagine silk, then if that's there, then the metapoetic moment in the second poem is the fact that she is a secretary. She is recording, documenting, taking notes, and basically we get to see it only because the secretary gives it to us, you know. Final thought on this book, on these choices of poems, something you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to yet.
I think all of Rosa Alcalà's poems, as well as her, you know, this collection too, deceptively small. They're deceptively tiny, I think, and she has a talent for the tinier she makes it, the more she amplifies possibilities of meaning. And I do think that she, as her bio of herself on her website, you know, she has said, I've not met her in person, and but I do know that she has said that she is the daughter of Spanish immigrants. And I do think that she is I think she's very concerned and very attuned. She's expert in finding those spaces in between things, in between experiences, in between perspectives, and handling it with such, and just being able to not just really kind of fill them in, but like open up more possibilities. I really enjoy reading her work.
Thank you so much, David. This was great.
Thank you.